Wanted to give an update to the board at the October board meeting. And initially we thought that that would be during my administrative presentation. But during the course of the last few times they were in front of us, I saw what I thought would constitute more than 10 or 15 minutes of presentation. So I thought to myself, well, maybe I'll just give them the whole education part of the meeting, and they can really take the board through where we're at with elevations and exteriors, and to some extent blueprints and plan layouts. And that was a great idea, were it not for I didn't mention it to them that their time period had gone from 15 to 20 minutes to something longer. So when we communicated that to them in their typical style, they rallied and patched together I think all of the important documents and basically a snapshot of where we are at today with respect to this project. And I think we're getting closer. Well, I know we're getting closer with building layout. I know we're getting closer with service layout within the building. We're still working on some elevation design features. How we can give the new building, a distinct flavor, but also a real sense for a campus and blending into the ESSB. And maybe some other logistic details about patient flow and visitor flow and wayfinding. But I can tell you that what we're going to show you today is by far closer to the finish line than we've ever been. So I think that there will be lots of time at the end for questions. When I turn it over to Jim and Craig, if questions during the middle of your presentation work well for you, you might mention that to the board. But the goal is for you to, at the end of this, for you to have a real good feel about where we're at, any questions you may have answered, any additional information you need, let us know, and just sort of a good overview of where we're at right now. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Jim Harmon and Craig Rizzo, two of the key architects from ZGF, and ask them to begin.
How many times I've heard that over the last 3 years, I don't know. So I just want to give a few remarks, and then Craig's going to actually walk through most of everything. As Mike said, this is really a snapshot in time of where we are. We've been working on the project for a little over 6 months. A lot of it had to do with was refining the scope in terms of, originally it was a project this big, and then it got a little bit smaller. And so working through all those and trying to get the right pieces into a smaller project has been what we've really been focusing on for most of the last 6 months. So first slide, really, Mike went through this. This is actually pictures, so you can see who he was talking about. Brent is not on the call. Greg, I believe, is on the call. He's the person we've been working with day to day at OAC. Brandon is with Abbott, and he's the director of pre-construction. He's the guy that is figuring out how much we can afford to build. And Josh is sort of my counterpart at Abbott. He's the project manager, the project exec for Abbott. I'm the PM, so that means that I get to talk to Mike a lot and convey that information that he's telling me, like, you need to produce a presentation for the board meeting. And Craig is the design lead. So Craig will be talking through most of this. Craig, can you go to the next one, which basically has the agenda? So we already did the introductions. We'll do a little bit of a project overview, then look at the site issues that are coming up because it's a tight site and there's a lot of parking that's associated with the medical office building portion of this that we've been challenged to try and find a way to put on the site in an economical fashion. We'll look through the planning that we've done to date and talk about the way we're trying to make sure that we're creating um, a, a project that flows from the 1999 building, connects to the 1988 building, to the ESSB, and is really merges all of the things that are going into the new project. So it's very easy for patients to find their place where they're going. We'll talk about materials that are used on the ESSB and on the 1995 building, and how we're trying to take from that information and the way that appearance and create an integrated campus so we don't have a whole series of different looking buildings. And that's one of the things that we're really working on right now, both interior and exterior. We don't have a lot of interior development at the moment in terms of interior design. But we have been working on that, and we'll be talking about that later in the process. And then it's really to look through where we are in terms of the development of the exterior and how that works with the ESSB and the 1995 building and views around the site. And then there's just a brief overview of where we are with the budget. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps and where we are in the process. Just before I stop yapping here, there's just a couple things that I want to emphasize. And one is that one of the unique things about your facility is that it's got the courtyard that's in the middle of it, and the dining and the kitchen area with Chef Aaron Stark is really seen as a major community amenity. And what we've tried to do is recognize that and capture that as part of the project going ahead. So you'll see something about how we've done that as we look at it. And again, I just want to emphasize that we're at a snapshot in time, and we're working to make sure that the project looks like a whole, as opposed to a series of multiple buildings that are kind of all sort of glued together. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Craig, unless there's any questions.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Craig Rizzo with ZGF. Happy to be here and happy to be a part of this project. As Mike said, we've gotten to know each other quite a bit, going back and forth and meeting online as best as we can with the team, a fully integrated team. We talk daily, multiple times, and it's been really a great experience. So I'm going to take you through about 30 slides or so and kind of give you an overview and just try to give you a good sense of where we are, as Jim had mentioned, in the SD, the schematic design process stage of where we're at currently. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go forward, and I'll be happy to try to address them or other folks on the team. Okay, let's see. Honestly, trying to advance the slide. So there we go. Okay, here's an aerial shot of the campus. On the left, the most recent construction, the ESSB. In the 1988, which is to the north, and the 1995, which is between the building and the water, off to the east. And as Jim mentioned, the courtyard in the center, which my first visitation to the hospital, to your campus, was one of the highlights for me to kind of walk by there and see the natural light coming in there. So finding that opportunity to rethink that and to plan that as we kind of build onto the campus has been a great thing to think about. So that pink portion is the 1965, the oldest portion of the campus and now there, and that will be removed. That's a significant chunk. It takes out major circulation with the image on the right with the blue dashed line, which is the most used thoroughfare going through the campus connecting across. The orange arrow up at the top of that drawing on the right is more of the staff functions. When we take that pink portion out, that's really kind of disconnecting the hospital. So there's a challenge day one of how do we kind of maintain that crucial connection for the facility during the interim. And that's one of the charges with designing this project, as well as reconnecting that when you start to backfill, infill, and add the new building components. So a great challenge. Now, when we look at this and how we build, we have to think about the context. We're taking out that, extracting that older portion, and we're going to build back in. And the program is pretty diverse. There's some major components. One, it's the dietary that wants to be the heart and the center to feed and provide for the campus, but more patient-faced programs that we're looking at and how to kind of utilize those and bring them out to the front so that they're ease of wayfinding and easily accessible. But also some components that are part of the organization, the operations that we also want to tuck back. So there's that give and play of trying to set up and program the layout, which we'll look at when we get to the plans. But in thinking about the massing, we're thinking about this in terms of a 1-level infill and a 2-level. And you'll see that more on as we get into the presentation of what that build is. But that gives you a sense, a little sketch of what the massing is going to evolve into, and we'll talk about why. Now, because you have these adjacent buildings, being the 1995 and the ESSB, they both have windows facing into each other. So considering a build that is multi-story in between those can be done, but it's challenging. The biggest challenge is the ESSB has patient rooms, and patient rooms require by code access to daylight. So that means it impacts the buildable component that could be between the two buildings. So that caused challenges, as well as some code issues in regards to building setback. So it became clear early on that in order to build higher, we had to pull that forward so that we could still accommodate those views and those connections. The other challenge we had is with floor-to-floor heights between the two buildings. There are different levels, so when thinking about how to make those connections in the future, or if we were to design those connections, that would have to be considered. So currently, with that 1-level infill, there is no second-story connection between the ESSB and the 1995. All components and access will be at grade at level 1 to get into those buildings. Okay. So as we start looking at the site, Jim mentioned many challenges. The two images are some great aerials that were done for this project to give a good sense of the site and what you have there on your campus. So with all kind of architectural projects, the biggest challenge is parking. Parking is always something that comes up, and how to accommodate and how to do that in creative ways. As we look at the drawing on the right, you can see in gray, the darker gray, that's the 2-level, is that 2-level structure that I mentioned. The 1-level is the component that's infilling in between the existing campus. And with that program, the city requires so many parking for how that program is determined. So once we understand the program, we can apply that metric and understand what the parking is. Now, the big driver for this is going to be obviously the clinical uses. And so there's a big component for parking. And parking tends to want to be as close as it can to the front entry. So as we infill the building in between where the old 1965 used to be, it allows for parking to the south, as well as parking to the east, because the need for parking is greater than you currently have on your campus. So with that, we're accommodating about 120 stalls for this new build, and that will blend in with the parking that you have. So you'll increase your capacity greatly by having the parking to the south, but also by going to the east. Going to the east, that pink line indicates that the grade, the topography there drops about 45 feet from the edge of the building all the way down to the adjacent street. And so how do we do that? And how do you do that economically? So the team has been working to level off that parking best we can. We'll come back in and we'll fill and we'll build retaining walls. The team's been looking at how to do so and how high those can be, as well as pitching the surface lot so that we can accommodate a level surface that staff and families can safely arrive to get to the front door. And so we've been looking at different systems to do that. The south parking lot, south of the building component, where you see the 53 stalls, that's going to provide adjacent parking for families to come and drop off. There's a drop off there, and they'll come off of 7th Street, make their way into the campus and park there. And if not, they can drop off and go back to the east and park there. So there'll be a pedestrian path that will allow east parking to get to the front door. And I can talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. But you can see in those two images, the hillside that's there, the topography change. a beautiful campus that has land that we need to manage in the project. And as I mentioned, these are some of the outlining the access. So the blue lines indicate car travel. So you can come off 7th, drive into the ESSB parking, turn right, go into the drop-off sequence, find parking there. And if not, you could pull out back onto 7th and make your way to the eastern lot. And that pink line depicts a pedestrian path for access, because we're going to provide a new door on the south side of that 2-story structure, the clinic entry. So the hospital will have 3 main entries. You'll have the ESSB entry, you'll have the clinic entry, and currently the 1995 entry, which is on the east side, as well as the ED entry and the ambulance on the north side. So, any questions? You following okay?
No.
Okay, great. Now, as we're looking at the site too, I want to draw attention to the service yard. That is also, I mentioned the dietary being the heart of the campus, but I think we all know too the service yard is as well, because that's where everything's coming in and out of the hospital. There'll be more activity there. Some other elements that we're working hard to minimize, as we know that it's a confined space already. And as I mentioned, trucks come in and out of there daily for their deliveries and takeaways. So trying to accommodate that, we're working with the team right now to work on that. So there'll be some evolution in that in presentations to come. Yeah, there was a lot of talk about, the site flows and, hospital has multiple portals and how do you access them, and all that comes into play when we start planning. And then this graphic just shows, because you're probably thinking, how much of that space does it take on the site? This is a super imposed 1965 building, shows the courtyard. You can see the new courtyard just to the right of that in kind of a light green, just to give you a sense of where it sits on the property.
And it's bigger.
It is
And it's bigger, yeah.
Thank you.
So here's the planning. So Marie, this should answer some of your questions. A lot of evolution, as Mike had said. We had come out there several times, just kind of rethinking and repackaging and re-strategizing how this all works. And so let's, the blue in this diagram indicates all kind of public access. And for connectivity, the courtyard is in the center, which is white, and I mentioned it's being larger. The very top of the program infill, the kind of ochre, we've got facilities, biomed, EVS, and then nursing admin to the right in the lavender, which is back by that existing corridor today, which is that crucial connection point from imaging to the ED. Then just south of that is the dietary component. So that's going to be the kitchen, storage, tri-storage, food prep, and all that. And then just south of that in the drawing, you can start to see those tables and chairs. That's going to be the servery and dining component. And so we're still working right now with the kitchen designer as well as Chef Stark to kind of design that space. So we're just starting that process. To the left component, you see the MRI suite. There's an added program there to add an MRI, and we're keeping that close to imaging and also close to the front door for ESSB to make that simple and easy for coming in for walk-ins and outpatient services for that.
So,
and then go ahead.
If I can ask a question here, because if we have to replace the MRI, how are we going to get it in the building, or get the old one out and the new one in?
That's a great question. Yeah.
So the MRI
ahead,
access will either and we actually reviewed this with I can't remember the MRI vendor, but we talked about it'll come down that same corridor where the food comes down. So it's that corridor that's just to the west of where the new development is. So up right, of course, you can't see my cursor, but it comes down the same corridor. And these 2 rooms that are in yellow that are directly east of the green room, which is the MRI room itself. One of them is the MRI equipment room, and the other is an equipment storage room. So the equipment storage room is designed so that we can pull out the wall to the corridor, and we can pull out the wall between the equipment storage room and the MRI and bring the MRI in and out through there. So it's really It's a straight down and then a one turn into there.
Hmm.
And so just moving south on the plan, you can see the radiation oncology with the linear accelerators being proposed on the left side. That's the big vault with the big thick walls around it, the green space. We've got an OB/GYN clinic, 6 exam rooms, and then coming down into that is the surgery. The outpatient surgery department is that whole block down there. So you can see right in the center, those 2 big green spaces. Those are the OR suites. The gray area is actually for future expansion. So considering that, and then the PACU, the pre and post and surgery arrival is just to the south of that. So that entry point at the south west end of the campus, just north of the parking there, is your specialty clinic access. So your secondary entry portal into the hospital. And when you go in there, there's elevators, the dark blue, to go up to the second floor to access the clinics. And there's a stairway there, but just connecting, you can see all that light blue connecting back to the campus.
And the expansion space for the surgery center has the ability to have a third OR built out in the future, as well as sterile processing.
Okay.
So then we have this diagram that really shows that kind of in the center drawing is that light blue is the kind of circulatory path for public. We've got the ESSB entry in the circle with the pink. You've got the surgical specialty clinic center down at the south that we were just talking about, also in pink. And then when you come to the kind of center of the campus, just near the courtyard to the lower left, you come to a decision point. So hopefully improving wayfinding by providing this larger courtyard that's going to allow natural light to come in and really taking that as an oasis as you're kind of in between these 4 buildings as they all come together, and this juncture is offering that space, the dietary component, the heart as we call it, the oasis of the campus, where it's going to bring natural light in and provide that kind of wayfinding monument for more intuitive finding your way through the hospital. So, and then making that connection back to imaging, that's super important. That's been a conversation that we've had throughout the project, is how to get folks from the front door of the ESSB back to the imaging department. And so trying to increase that wayfinding and making it an easier process to get back to. So
Great.
And of course, with the interior shots in the upper right, using that as kind of a design parameter for blending and keeping a cohesive design throughout. So taking points for that. Okay, we've been studying in models as well. That's the image on the left. We come to meet with the team and bring models for showing how we think this is coming together. And this is the second floor, a smaller floor plate, but one that has 40 exam rooms, so a lot of clinic space. The purple and the orange on the right is staff and support providers. So they'll have views out to the west. The blue area is the kind of assemblage for the lobby and waiting area. They'll have views out to the south, which are wonderful views, and then views out to the west as well. Okay. And then this is the circulation, just a quick path of understanding how folks come in. They go down the corridor on the left and then into each specialty clinic.
Looks really,
Now,
really exciting.
Expansion, I mentioned early on, with that parking lot to the south, it offers us a pad for adding on more space potentially. So expanding clinics just gives you a quick idea of what that plan might look like. And I think given the height requirements, you can build, I think, 3 levels there. So you could get a good bunch of, this is a hypothetical condition, but if you were to add clinics, it could look like this.
And
now,
and just a note here, you'll see that the surgical area in this plan is different than the previous one. So it just shows that we've been working through all different sorts of arrangements for how to put surgery in that 6 exam room clinic in there over the last couple months.
Great, thank you for that, Jim.
And also, I think this points out that we really are trying to look 10 to 15 years down the road. And, our mantra is we want to avoid the next group of hospital administrator, building designers from asking the question, just what the hell were they thinking? Or why weren't they thinking about the next project? So I think when we were really trying to plot out where's the most sensible place for additional specialty clinic exam rooms, which will probably be a need in the next 5 to 10 years, certainly closer to all of the diagnostic equipment and instrumentation of the hospital is best. And we think that would be a great pad. And then of course we have the pad further to the south on the orchard lot, but I just wanted to reinforce the notion that everybody is truly trying to think about the next project and making it easier for the next group of folks who grapple with this.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize, yeah, Mike's really kind of pushed us to do that. And that corridor that you see, the blue line that extends from the hospital near the courtyard all the way down will continue. And when I go to the next slide too, for connecting the clinics as well, has been a strong kind of design driver as we've been developing the schemes. So. And then, of course, as I mentioned, parking is always challenged by the program. There'll be an increase of parking need as well. Clinics, exam rooms are a big driver. For the more quantity of exam rooms, the more parking you need. So by that time, you'll need to do a significant investment on the site for developing, a parking structure. And what does that look like? And because you have the topography, there's some room there to minimize the impact to the views, but certainly something that you'll need to take on as well. I've indicated a drop off in the center there. There might be a new front door at that point, because if you have more parking on the east side, they need to get into the clinic space, and that will be a new a connection point. So something to think about for the future for sure.
The challenge will be once we get past this stage, as Craig is saying, is that we're probably going to exceed the ability to put all of the parking on grade on the site. And so right. That's going to be a challenge. Do we do a structure? Do we reach to the south and try and put parking down there? Or is there another solution that we come up with?
Right.
When I say we, I really mean you, because I don't assume that we're going to get to do that. But
so now we'll get into where we are with the kind of studies of massing and architecture. The existing campus, looking at the ESSB, has a low use of brick and glass, and a very dark, almost black brick and glass. And that's a pretty good datum line for the ESSB building, whereas the whole, you can see in the other images, it wraps around entirely on the lower level. When you lift up to the second and third levels, you get the brown tone, warmer toned brick, as well as glass with playful use of like a wood look panel or wood panelization. There is a kind of metal banding that stitches it all together and holds it together. And then at the entry point, you get this this element of expression that has a warmer tone. In this case, it's precast concrete and glass and metal. And these are references we're taking as we look at the exterior. Also being mindful of budget. This building is a different exterior system or structure system than we're looking at. You heard Mike mention that we've been really trying to focus on providing as much program we can and thinking strategically on how to kind of put this together. There's some more images looking at the SSB, so taking note of what's there. I even have some images of the 1995, which was EFIS and metal panel and glass. And so as we're looking at the structure, we've been working with the design team coming up with, well, how do you kind of approach something in a challenge market to be efficient in how you use materials and sequencing and construction. And so we're looking at a concrete precast tilt-up system, which these images on the left can indicate, and I have some precedents to share as well. But also utilizing the glass, utilizing the brick, some of the wood look, and either the same panel or similar panels, but trying to make that all cohesive as well as the metal panel use. And I'm calling reference to the image above. You can see the red encircled areas to see how we're kind of pulling these pieces, and we'll get more in the elevations. I'm going to share two projects that we have done. ZGF and ZGF with Abbott. The top image is Smoky Point for tech up near Everett. And then the lower one is the Burien Clinic that we did for Virginia Mason Franciscan Health more recently as well. Both are concrete tilt-up buildings and used them differently, plain with metal panel and glass. The Smoky Point one actually uses wood epay in this case to kind of put onto the surface. We also can play with the concrete as well as surfacing and getting some recess moments in the structure. The good thing about concrete tilt-up is it's doing the structural work for the most part, as well as determining the envelope. And there's ways that we can do that. And we're working with the team now to kind of find out, what does that mean? Is there integral colors? Is it a topical application? Is it using combinations of panels, materials on it? And how do we do so in a cost-effective way that brings the cohesiveness where it needs to be and allows it to be the building to provide the program as it needs to be as also.
So Craig, just one other thing that the concrete tilt-up allows us to do as well is it is the lateral force resisting system of the building, which allows us to have a brace-free interior inside the MOB area without having to go to the expense of doing a moment frame. So it's a very economical construction system.
And so this is, elevations are difficult to look at, but from the way we work in architecture and design helps us kind of look at relationships. And so this is the south elevation to the left. You can see the ESSB drop off in that elevation. And then I put an image up there just to kind of help tie that relationship together. And then to the right, you can see the loading. You can see the south end of the 1995 building, and then off to the right is parking. And so you can see how we're starting to play with the composition and proportions of the building and the materials. We're also thinking of having a canopy out front. We're determining the size, but to allow that drop off to have some covered access as folks come in and out of surgery in the clinics so that they can go home and get under cover during the inclement weather. But, taking cues from the ESSB for sure. You do see kind of the upper level there. There's mechanicals. There will be mechanical systems on the roof, similar to the SSB. We're working to kind of mitigate that height and keep it as low as we can. But there'll be some elements up on that structure as well. This is the western view. Now, this elevation is taken at grade for the new build part, as well as the ESSB, but the real experience is when you're on Sheridan and you're looking at the campus, right? So when you look at the image on the upper left, that's really what you see, unless you lean over the ledge and you look down at the lower level. But you can see how we're, playing off that entry element as well. And then we have a couple 3D views to share. These are easier to understand and see. You can see the massing. We try to do these mostly at pedestrian level. We do have some aerials because they're also, they help explain the condition. This would be somewhere near Sheridan and 7th, looking at. You can see the parking lot and the ESSB obviously in front of us. You can see the entry point. You can start to see a canopy. Couple more views. And granted, this is still schematic design, so we're modeling, but we're building and trying to understand what this is. So there's a lot of artistic interpretation as we're doing this.
I must say, I like the fact that corner on 7th and Sheridan corner of the building is matches, or at least is like the one of the SSB. I think that helps tie it in quite well.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that's a challenge that we've been having in terms of the SSB is a 3-story building, and that entry box occurs at the 2nd and 3rd level. That you can see in this image here on the left. And, we're a 2-story building trying to, be a more direct sibling of massing and material use. So that's something that we're still and will continue to work on. So this is a view from the SSB drop off looking back. Now, just to kind of express where that image, the man in the with the bicycle, that metal clad element behind him is the linear accelerator. Linear accelerator is a serious concrete vault. And so there's no windows, no nothing. And so we're trying to tie it in with the materiality as best we can to the ESSB and hopefully have enough room to kind of do some plantings and whatnot in front of it to soften that. But it is a big thing. So,
Well, actually strategically placed behind the column of the ESSB
in the view.
canopy is there's actually a window that goes into either the control room or the waiting area for the vault. You can kind of see it right there, that black
Yeah.
thing.
Or in the center of this image, you can
Yeah.
see a little bit.
Anyway,
So we're trying to put windows where we can for best optimal view. And so the proportions don't always match up to the other existing buildings because of that. So we'll continue to work on window placement. Here's a view from Sheraton. As I mentioned, when you're on Sheraton, you're looking at, this is what most folks driving by Sheraton will see. And then this is from the east parking lot. You can see the 1995, as well as looking back up. And this will be the pathway and the stairs are being developed. Obviously, it's early on, but we'll have safe passage for ADA accessibility to get folks from the parking all the way up, as well as the drop off, as I mentioned. And then there'll be a series of stairs to get folks up. Currently, I know, and I've even parked down here and I walk up and around and you're in the road or you cross across the lawn, but we're going to provide a way up there and it'll be landscaped and whatnot. There are some walls that you're seeing in the loading area, which we're still determining what those walls will be and what elements those are being. All those pieces are still moving. There's some things that we're working around, so the team's working pretty hard on determining what that will be, and we'll share that in future developments. And then,
go ahead.
go ahead.
Sorry, Craig.
No, Jim, go ahead.
I was just going to say, can we go back to the previous one?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we did try to do on this elevation is kind of capture the rhythm and the proportions of the openings that are in the 1995 building and draw them into the east facade of the new building. We're not quite sure how that's going to resolve at that corner yet, but that's what we're trying to do, is make sure that no matter which side we're looking at this project from, that it hangs together.
Yeah.
And then we have a couple views here, and I know I'm watching the time too, so I want to make sure we talk about schedule and budget as well. But these are the aerial views I mentioned that just help us understand how the massings are coming together. The roof is very complicated in that there's 3 buildings there that we're going to be tying together. So we're working with our structural engineer pretty closely and Brandon's team on what that's looking like so that we can accommodate that. But a couple just fly around aerials as you spin around. Okay, and then I think that's it for the exterior.
But we are still working on, and it's this push me pull you that and so we have the design team that will do anything that we ask them to do. Then we have Brannon, the man with the green eye shade and calculator, and saying, well, that's taking you in the wrong direction, Mike. So it's this balance of making the building look as similar to the ESSB, but in the most cost-effective way, because we don't want to get to a place where, well, we can apply more brick here, which would make the building look more like the ESSB, but in exchange lose 6 exam rooms. So we're still tweaking, but I agree with you. I'm really happy with where it's at now, and think that the design team and contractors done a great job meeting us in the middle.
Thanks, Mike. So just a little brief overview of where we are in the schedule. Where that says we are here. So we're about 4 weeks away from the completion of schematic design, which means that at the end of this phase, we'll have the plans worked out pretty much the way they're shown now with a little bit more detail. We'll have some elevations, we'll have some interior, more interior development, and there'll be a design narrative which will describe what all the at least the systems are in the building. And in parallel with what we're doing, we're working with the MEP, both the design or the trade partners and the design engineers to work out all the systems that are going within the building. And so there will be, at the end of that, there'll be a package which Abbott can then put together a really good estimate for where we are at the time. After schematic design, then we jump into really the detailed development of all the spaces and all the systems that go into the building, and we're scheduling about 4 months for that. So in the middle of March, we'll have that wrapped up, and that's when we can really get a really good detailed estimate. CDs, which is producing the documents that will go in for permitting and for the contractor to use to build it, will take us another about 4 months. So we're projecting that we're going to start construction probably in August, end of July, beginning of August, and then we're still working out exactly the logistics of how long the construction is going to take, but it will probably take, I can't remember what we had. Josh, do you remember the number? Was it like 80 weeks or something?
It's
16
months.
16 months. So that's just, so I left that, I didn't fix the end of that. That's just the start. That's not the entire part of construction. Any questions about the schedule?
How long do you think demolition will take?
Josh, I'm going to dump that in your lap.
Yeah, we're about a month to 2 months, somewhere in there, depending on the amount of asbestos and ACM hazardous material that needs to be abated.
And that would start?
We're targeting August, September of 2023.
Okay, thank you.
So about 10 months from now, right?
Okay.
And you also showed early on the flow of patients across a blue line, and then north of that, the flow of staff in an orange line. How will the patients flow? That I think it was in a very, very early slide. How will the patients flow? There you go. How are they going to flow when you're doing the demolition derby in the middle of that blue line? Are they then going to be routed up towards through the orange line?
That's a really good question, and we don't have that resolved yet. We're going to be able to maintain the orange connection during construction because we're not going to be doing, well, we're going to have to do a little tweaking in that corridor, but the intent is to maintain that connection throughout construction. But we have not worked out the total logistics package for whether or not we're going to have to construct some kind of temporary connection between the 95 building and the ESSB. And I don't know where that would be at this point. It may be that we're just going to have to use that north corridor for double duty for a while. But we have been thinking about that.
Okay.
So Josh, is Brandon on the call?
He is, but he's got spotty coverage, so I'm gonna put on my green visor and do my best Brandon impression. Do you have that slide with the concept budget?
Yeah.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Josh Sykes, project executive, introduced earlier with Abbott Construction, and Brandon, my estimating pre-construction partner, is probably on a ferry right now with some spotty coverage. So our design build estimate that we've got in front of you is based on the concept that ZGF, the design partner, just presented, including a forecasted guaranteed maximum price, which includes contingencies at just north of $61 million. Our construction document completion and construction document completion and construction administration for the design portion of that budget estimate is just north of $1 million as well. Adding in the Washington State sales tax at 5.4 million brings us to a total estimated construction cost of 67.7 and some change.
And
Don't
just to trail that, this is the hard costs of the project. There still are soft costs that bring the project the number north of 75 now, that we are still accounting for and trying to figure out a way to show. I mean, so a big chunk has been paid as part of the release of design fees up to this point. Another big chunk is the equipment that we'll have to purchase for the project, and some of that will be tucked into our budget process. But one, I just wanted to let you know that no, the $75 million budget didn't shrink down to 67. But this is just the hard project cost, and there still are soft costs that we probably will have our arms around next month to give you sort of a better view of total project cost estimate.
It seems to me it's a great pity that for a public hospital district that we have to pay sales tax. I realize some of that comes back to the county because it's paid in the county, but it seems a great pity that we can't knock off that $5.5 million somehow or other. Maybe something through the legislature we could advocate for.
Yeah, there's a handful of public hospital district projects going on right now, and including at Moses Lake and Quincy, and we had a similar discussion with Matt from AWPhD, and it's possible that there might be a discussion about not elimination of sales tax, but some sort of rebate provision, but because everybody agrees that that's a sensible thing to eliminate municipal tax on a municipal corporation, but on the other hand, pretty hard to make go away. But
exactly,
we're asking questions, Mari.